Well, we're back right here in the studio, and we have with us right now Dr. Farah Naqvi, who is an industrial organizational psychologist and associate professor in management. Good evening, doctor.
Good evening. Thank you so much for having me here.
A pleasure to have you with us right here on Hala, Kuwait. And doctor, could you please tell us about your background in teaching and training? Please tell us.
Sure. To introduce myself, I'm an academician with over 14 years of experience in higher education, corporate training, and HRD consulting. Currently, I'm associated with GCUE Kuwait as a faculty and engaged with multiple institutions as a resource person for rendering training and consulting services. I did my doctoral studies in the area of organization behavior, and the area of my research was emotional labor. My master's degree was in psychology with specialization in human resource management. In my career, I have got the chance to conduct management development programs and work on consulting projects for diverse clientele, alhamdulillah. While pursuing writing as my hobby, I also published my debut book titled The Light in Blackout. It was in the year 2019. I also love to invest in reading and writing for self-enrichment and contribute as a featured author and columnist for different business magazines, newspapers, and online portals. Interested viewers may like to check out my books available on Amazon and articles on website farhanaqvi.com. Thank you so much for having me here on your prestigious show. And
well, it's a pleasure to have you with us this evening, Doctor. And people all over, they've been greatly impacted by the pandemic economically, socially, and mentally. Research suggests that people with a better sense of self and purpose in life are relatively more resilient and can come back quicker. How would you describe the self, please?
Very interesting question. We can describe the self as something which is used to refer to the totality of the individual, an individual's feeling of identity, consisting of characteristic attributes, conscious and unconscious, mental and physical. The most commonly used terms that is often used to describe self are the self-concept and self-esteem. Now, self-concept is used to refer how someone thinks or perceives themselves. To be aware of oneself is to have a concept of oneself. And self-esteem refers to the self-worth, the extent to which we like, accept, or approve of ourselves. So this has an element of self-evaluation. Now, there can be another interesting way to look at self, and that could be through the concept of duality. This was given by a psychologist called William James. Now, he talks of the two aspects of the self, the I and the me. I can maybe put it through this example. Now, let us say we consider a statement where I say, I see Mary. Here, I am doing the seeing. Now, if I say, I see me, here I am still the one doing the seeing, and the thing I'm seeing is me. Mm-hmm. So how to distinguish between the I and the me? The term I is used to refer to that aspect of self that is actively perceiving, thinking, seeing, the self as a knower, the experiencer or storyteller, the present tense. We often use the term experiencing self for this. And the term me refers to that aspect which is the object of our attention, thought, or perception. Me is the self as a known, experienced, past tense, story, memory, often referred to as the remembered self. Now, why I talk about this to answer your question is that in more formal terms, we can say that we as humans are uniquely gifted to be able to take ourselves as an object of our own attention. Years back, when I was myself a psychology student in my master's program, one of our professors made us do this 20-statement test where we had to write statements to the question, who am I? Now, suppose a decade later, if I ask the same question to myself, who am I? The change in the answer will give me an insight into how I have evolved over the years. So now, all those who might be listening to that talk, maybe if they try this projective test, writing answers to the simple question, who am I? As many statements as they come to their mind, you'll find that the answers will provide you insights into not only your self-concept and self-worth, but give you a chance to reflect upon your perception of yourself and the reasons for the same, and how it is promoting or hindering you towards what you want to be. Now, much of our perception comes from the labels we have received from people around us, or is your description coming from labels you've given yourself based on your life events and experiences? Whether the description of self you have written is giving you a feeling of harmony or creating tension. So what I'm trying to say is that the most interesting fact about self is that it is continually evolving through a process of individuation, which Carl Jung points out. And hence the importance of paying attention to developing a sense of self, self-awareness, self-regulation, so that we as humans are able to optimize on our capabilities to the fullest. And this serves as a purpose of self-empowerment, because an individual with a realistic and accurate assessment of self, one's strengths and weaknesses, will definitely be better positioned to forge forward and overcome any obstacles throughout their life, be it the pandemic situation or any other kind of situation in personal life also.
So tell us, doctor, now moving on a little bit, emotional quotient, is it EQ in children and adults is being given more consideration than IQ these days? Why is that becoming increasingly important to have a sense of self? Tell us a little bit more about that, please.
Okay. As we are noticing, automation and artificial intelligence are bringing newer opportunities, greater efficiencies to business and society. But emotional intelligence is one such area that artificial intelligence and machines find hard to emulate. And as I said in my previous answer too, having a sense of self is a source of self-empowerment. While IQ is extremely essential for academic grades and securing a job, but EQ helps us in making the most of our life and opportunities that comes our way. And having an element of self-awareness is becoming increasingly important as we are living in times of accelerating change and uncertainty. Now what happens is a poorly developed sense of self can make a person more vulnerable and also affect the kind of decisions he or she makes in life. Because the four basic components of emotional intelligence, the self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship management, all this helps an individual progress in life through better acknowledgement of one's emotional states, management of the same, and also in interpersonal relationships at work and life. Mm-hmm. Now, if you say that if a person has a very weak sense of self, now such people likely to get easily influenced by others' opinion and judgments. This is often reflected in their seeking social approval instead of self-validation.
Sure.
Now, what is the harm in this? The drawback is that if we persistently and heavily rely on allowing our self-concept to be defined by not how we see ourselves, but how others are acknowledging us, it can create several problems. First, we will constantly be depending on others' approval to feel good about ourselves. Then we may also feel disgraced or outraged if somebody nullifies our feelings. Thirdly, if we value someone else's opinion, approval over our own sentiments and beliefs, what do you think it will lead to? It will lead us to seeking the validation of others on a continuous basis, giving them the power to influence the decisions of our life. So I suggest here that the EQ is very important, and it's very essential to have a sense of self, to engage actively in self-validation rather than self-approval, because it's about accepting one's emotions, progress, strengths, success, limitations, flaws, and mistakes. The idea is basically to be our own cheerleader rather than seeking it externally, so that we are able to embrace our evolving self wholeheartedly. And this can be achieved by working on enhancing our emotional intelligence.
Yeah, self is something which is continuously evolving. It's influenced by many life experiences, the high points, low points. It's just continuously evolving. Do you agree with that, doctor?
Yes, very rightly said. Truly agree.
Okay, so how can one build, a strong and sense of self? How can one do that?
Okay, to answer this question, your question reminds me of an article I wrote in 2020
Tell us
on
about
the power
that.
of stories.
Yeah.
See, everybody's life is often a roller coaster ride. We have our share of challenges,
Sure.
pain, loss, heartbreaks, achievements, success, myriad experiences. The high and low points that you talk about in your question and how we choose to respond to them significantly affect us. Now, to answer your question, I will drop on my article that I wrote that is about the narrative construction of identity and power of stories. Why stories? Because the default mode of human cognition is narrative mode. And if we understand from the realm of narrative psychology, human beings deal with experiences by observing, listening, and telling stories. Stories help us connect with ourselves and also with others. You must have experienced that in real life, when we want someone to know us, what do? We share our stories with them, stories from our childhood, school days, family, love, interests, other things. Similarly, in order to know someone well, we try to know their experiences, trials,
Sure.
turning points that were instrumental in shaping their personality. Now, whatever I'm trying to say is the story we tell about ourselves, to ourselves, and to others influences our perception of self and how we foresee and construct our future. I'll repeat it again. What I'm trying to say is that the story we tell about ourselves, to ourselves, and to others influences our perception of self and how we foresee and construct our future. Because we all engage in integrating our life narrative around a reconstructed past, a perceived present, and an imagined future with the idea that we will get a sense of unity and purpose in our life. Now, the way we narrate our story, that tells a lot about how we see ourselves. Appreciating this fact, what I often do in my training programs and personal coaching sessions is, drawing upon the work of Mac Adams, I do this activity with my participants where I ask them to write a book on their life, where I ask them, okay, if you're writing a book about your life, write the book title. For example, the girl name is Mariam, so Mariam the Perseverer or whatever, depending on how the person's life is. Next, I ask them to write minimum six chapter titles and one-line description of the same. And then I ask them to write a final chapter and into the future. The purpose of this storytelling outline is to help them organize the life events, basically, and not basically to go deeply into the memories. Very interesting things that come out is in the debriefing that some people tell redemptive stories that transition from bad to good.
Okay.
So, for example, a man who grew up in, let us say, utter poverty shares that this taught him how to be grateful in life and value small things in life. And on the contrary, there are people who interpret their lives as going from good to bad. So, for example, a person was craving to find a job in a given country, but when he gets it, he complains that, I had to make so many sacrifices to get this job or work in this country. So they see their lives as going from good to bad. Now, such stories we call contamination stories. Such people tend to be more anxious and depressed. Why I'm sharing this small activity and experience with you is because though our stories are very much written unconsciously, relying heavily on our younger years, the stories we tell ourselves and others, the stories we knit and rehearse in our mind, have the power to construct us, break us, reshape us, or define us. So the insight to draw from this is that the next time your mind is weaving a narrative, be mindful. Re-examine constructively the narrative. Is there anything I'm thinking in my narrative that pulls me down? And try to weave stories that assist you in your self-development and growth. So,
very well said, Doctor. And we'd like to thank you so much for your time with us this evening. Do you have any last words or comments for the audience watching tonight's episode of Hala Kuwait?
Pardon?
Do you have any last words or comments for the audience watching tonight's episode of Hala Kuwait?
Yeah, sure. I would say that be true to yourself, distinguish yourself by focusing on your values, beliefs, and truth. Begin by making choices for your life instead of looking others to make decisions for you. Connect with yourself by being the observer of your own life, which will help you be more attuned with your inner self. Seek feedback, maybe, from reliable sources to know more about your blind self. And lastly, see challenges as you all are going through tough times as a way to know yourself, so that when you're faced with difficult situations, see them as opportunities to decide who you are and see what you're capable of.
Very well said. Well, we'd like to thank you so much, Dr. Farah Naqvi, Industrial Organization Psychologist and Associate Professor in Management, for being our guest. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Doctor.